Before Piastri, Ricciardo, before Webber, there was Alan Jones. Tough, fast, and fiercely determined, Jones is the last Australian to have won the Formula One World Championship, and along with the legendary Jack Brabham, is one of only 2 Australians to have done so. But his road to the top was anything but smooth. This is a story of grit, glory, and a rivalry that defined the season. This is the story of Alan Jones. Alan Stanley Jones was born on November 2nd, 1946, in Melbourne, Australia. Racing ran in the blood. His father, Stan Jones, was a prominent driver in Australian motorsport and even won the non-championship Australian Grand Prix in 1959. Despite his pedigree, Alan's road to Formula One would be long and winding. As a young man, he worked in his father's Holden dealership in order to fund his racing activities on the local circuit. And in 1967, he moved to the UK with little more than an ambition and a suitcase full of belief. Sadly, that alone wasn't enough to start a career in racing, never mind make a name for himself and break into Formula One. After failing to make any progress, Jones returned to Australia, and after 3 years of taking stock, he went back to the UK in 1970, this time with a plan to finance his career by buying and selling second-hand cars. He supplemented this income by renting houses around London and then subletting rooms to the legions of Australians coming to the city for work in the early 70s. At that time, Australians and Kiwis were coming over to London in droves, working as labourers or in bars, and they all needed cheap accommodation. Jones's plan worked like a charm and added to his pot of funds, to the point where it was enough money to purchase a Formula 3 car, a car which he promptly destroyed at Brands Hatch, setting his ambitions back, but only temporarily. He entered the British Formula 3 Championship in 1971 with a replacement car, doing well enough to earn a tryout with the March team, which didn't result in an offer of a race seat, but he was able to sign with the GRD team instead, gaining racing experience and almost claiming the Formula 3 title in 1973. He moved up to Formula Atlantic in 1974, and there he came to the attention of former British Formula 3 champion Harry Stiller, who signed him to drive a privately entered Hesketh for the 1975 Formula 1 season. That lasted just 4 races, but in that time, Jones impressed enough to come to the attention of Graham Hill, who was by now running his own team, and Hill hired him to sub for Rolf Stommelen after the German was injured in the Spanish Grand Prix accident, which cost the lives of 5 spectators. Once again, he produced some eye-catching performances, including bringing the car home in 5th place at the Nürburgring, and as a result was offered a drive for 1976 with John Surtees' team. Over the course of the season, Jones brought the car home in the points 3 times, with a best result of 4th place in the chaotic season finale at Mount Fuji in Japan. Jones and the Surtees team split at the end of the season, and it looked as if his career was on hold. However, when Welshman Tom Price was killed in a brutal accident at the South African Grand Prix, the Shadow team called Jones up as his replacement. Jones put in a string of strong performances, culminating in his first and the team's only ever victory at the Austrian Grand Prix. Jones had qualified in 14th place, but in a race run in mixed conditions on a drying track which had been dampened by morning rain, he worked his way up to 2nd place behind James Hunt, taking the lead when the McLaren driver retired with 13 laps to go, and going on to win the race comfortably ahead of Niki Lauda. The Österreich-Ring of the 70s was not the sanitised, shortened version of the track we know today. It was a fast circuit with swooping corners all taken at high speed, barring the Hellerlicht chicane, which had been introduced after Mark Donoghue's death the previous season. With major elevation changes as it weaved through the Styrian mountains, the Österreich-Ring was a real driver's circuit, and a victory in the tricky conditions, driving a midfield car, significantly raised Jones' profile with other Formula 1 teams. By the end of the season, Jones had secured 7th place in the championship and was already being courted by Ferrari, who were going to have to replace Niki Lauda as the Austrian departed for Brabham Alfa Romeo. Jones met with Enzo Ferrari and thought that he had an agreement to drive for the team. However, Ferrari then decided to hire Gilles Villeneuve instead. Jones was less than impressed by the news that he'd been passed over, and believed the decision was made not on the basis of racing ability, but because the potential market for Ferrari sales in North America was much larger than that in Australia. Another team, with no concerns about selling sports cars, was also interested in Jones's signature though. Frank Williams, who had lost his original team to Walter Wolf, had started up a new team in 1977, and in 1978, offered Jones a contract to drive their only car. The team hadn't run a full season in 1977 and looked like a midfield entry at best on that basis. But with the Ferrari option no longer on the table, Jones signed for Williams in 1978. The partnership's first season proved to be rather more successful than expected, with Jones bringing the car home 3 times, claiming a season best result of second place at Watkins Glen in the penultimate race of the season. The 1978 championship had been won by Mario Andretti in the new ground effect Lotus 79. For 1979, Lotus went all in on aerodynamics with the wildly unsuccessful Lotus 80, and Ferrari and Brabham Alfa Romeo were hampered by the flat 12-cylinder engines they were using. Williams designer Patrick Head based the team's new car on the Lotus 79, adding some enhancements of his own. The team expanded to a 2-car operation for the first time, with Clay Regazzoni joining as second driver. The first half of the season brought mixed results, with the team struggling to get the car working right, and then having it fail to reach the finish line in 5 of the first 7 races, with Jones scoring the team's first podium at Long Beach, in amongst all those DNFs. At the Belgian Grand Prix, something clicked, and the team took a huge step forward. The second half of the season saw Williams suddenly leap to the front of the pack. Jones claimed his and the team's first ever pole position at the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, and teammate Regazzoni claimed the team's first ever victory after Jones's engine failed whilst leading. At the next race in Germany, Jones led Regazzoni home for the team's first ever 1-2 finish, following it up with wins in Austria and Holland. Jones then won from pole position in Canada, and in the second half of the year Williams had won 5 of the 7 races, with Jones claiming 4 of them. It was a breakout season for team and driver, moving from midfield also-rans to domination through the length of the season. Jones finished 3rd in the title battle, and 1980 was expected to be even better. For the new season, Jones would have a new teammate, Argentinian Carlos Reutemann, and with the team expecting to be in contention for the World Championship, Frank Williams had made it clear to his new driver that he was the team's number 2 and would be expected to cede positions to Jones if it became necessary. The season opened with Reutemann's home race at the Buenos Aires circuit, and the race descended into something approaching a farce as the combination of high temperatures, the enormous grip afforded by the ground effect cars, and the acceleration loads on the track's surface tore the circuit to pieces, meaning that drivers were spinning off, right, left and centre. Jones, who had qualified on pole position, slipped down the field after spinning off not once but twice, and needed to pit to clear the grass which had accumulated in his car's radiators as a result. Reutemann had an engine failure after spinning off and blocking his own radiators with grass. Villeneuve crashed out on the tricky surface, and all of that meant that the recovering Jones claimed victory ahead of Nelson Piquet. The story of the season was already written. In Brazil, Jones recovered to claim 3rd place after a poor qualifying session, but retired from the next race in South Africa. Frenchman René Arnoux won both races to claim the championship lead, and at Long Beach Jones retired again, this time nerfed out of the race by the Alfa Romeo of Bruno Giacomelli. Piquet claimed pole position and his first ever win, and joined Arnoux at the top of the championship standings, with Jones now down to 3rd. Belgium brought another pole position for Jones, but in the race the Williams was comprehensively outpaced by Didier Pironi's Ligier, the Frenchman claiming his first victory, and becoming the 4th winner in 5 races of the season to date. Arnoux now led the championship from Jones, with Piquet and Pironi next, but the 4 were covered by a 4-point gap in what was proving to be a very competitive championship year. Pironi claimed pole position at Monaco and seemed to be headed for another victory until he crashed into the barriers with 20 laps remaining. Reutemann took over the lead and claimed his first victory for Williams. Jones retired with transmission problems, whilst Piquet claimed the championship lead by finishing in 3rd place. The next race should have been the Spanish Grand Prix. However, in what was to prove to be a long-running dispute with the Formula One Constructors Association, the FIA stripped the race of its championship status. The so-called Grand D manufacturers, Ferrari, Renault and Alfa Romeo, went home, but the mainly British Fokker team stayed and had a race anyway, one which Jones claimed after having started from pole position, although as far as the championship was concerned, it was, quite literally, pointless. The next race in Sweden was cancelled completely, and the title battle resumed at the Paul Ricard circuit in France. The race turned into a battle between Williams and the combined might of the French teams. Jones and Reutemann qualified behind the 2 Ligiers and Arnoux's Renault. Lafitte seemed set to win his home race, but had cooked his tyres in the early part of the race, allowing Jones to catch and pass him for the lead. Then, Lafitte held up his teammate Pironi for several laps, until the latter was able to pass and chase the Williams. Jones had sufficient gap to hold on to win by 4 seconds. Whilst Piquet and Arnoux claimed 4th and 5th places, the 4 drivers remained tied together, separated by just 5 points more than halfway through the season. At the British Grand Prix, Pironi once more claimed pole position, ahead of Lafitte and the 2 Williams. On race day, the Ligier suffered from cracking wheel rims, which manifested themselves as punctures. Pironi, leading comfortably, was forced into a pit stop after a front tyre deflated, whilst Lafitte spun off and out of the race with the same problem. Jones took over the lead and was able to reel off the remaining laps without any pressure, clinching victory, with Piquet passing Reutemann for 2nd place. Pironi recovered from his pit stop, climbing back into the points before retiring with a recurrence of the tyre deflation problem. Jones and Piquet had now opened a lead in the championship, and the title battle was clearly going to be fought by the Brazilian and the Australian. In Germany, Jones claimed pole position and led until a puncture forced a pit stop on him. He recovered to finish 3rd behind Lafitte and Reutemann and ahead of Piquet to extend his championship lead. A week later in Austria, Jones finished 2nd to Jabouille's Renault, which was having severe tyre problems, and held off the Williams by less than a second, but with Piquet only managing 5th place and none of his other rivals scoring, Jones was now in a strong position to clinch the title. What looked so good didn't take long to turn bad though. At the next race in Holland, Jones damaged the ground effect skirts on his car and dropped right out of contention as main rival Piquet took a comfortable victory. The Italian Grand Prix was held at the Imola circuit for the first time ever, and Piquet once more romped to victory, with Jones recovering to 2nd place after another unconvincing race. Jones's massive title lead had been wiped out in just 2 races, and now it was Piquet who headed the championship battle, with just 2 more races remaining. In Canada, the Brabham team fitted their spare car with a specially tuned engine, which Piquet drove to pole position. Without the benefit of a similar qualifying engine, Jones claimed 2nd place on the grid. At the start of the race, Jones got alongside the Brabham and into the first corner simply cut across Piquet, forcing him into the wall and out of the race. Behind the spinning Brabham there was carnage. With several cars involved in incidents, the circuit was blocked and the organisers had no choice but to stop and restart the race. Piquet was able to use his spare car, but the team knew that the special qualifying engine had no hope of surviving a whole race, so it was no surprise when Piquet retired from the lead. Pironi crossed the finish line first, but was given a 60-second penalty which dropped him to 3rd, leaving Jones to claim the victory, and with it the World Championship, with 1 race left to run. At the final race of the season at Watkins Glen, Jones took his 5th win of the season, 6 if you include his win in Spain, after Bruno Giacomelli's Alfa Romeo suffered an electrical problem whilst leading comfortably. It had been a triumphant year for Jones and Williams, winning both titles, and for 1981 the team looked forward to continuing its dominance. The new season started in some style for Williams. The first race of the season in South Africa had lost its World Championship status, a casualty in the ongoing war between the British and European teams, but went ahead without Ferrari, Renault, Alfa Romeo, Ligier and Osella. The season proper started at Long Beach, where the 2 repeated the feat, after Riccardo Patrese, who had initially led after qualifying on pole position in his Arrows, retired with engine problems. Reutemann took over the lead with Jones behind, and when Reutemann made a mistake lapping a backmarker, Jones was through and into the lead, going on to claim the win by 10 seconds from his teammate. In Brazil, simmering tensions between Jones and Reutemann would come to the surface in spectacular fashion. Reutemann wasn't the easiest teammate to get along with. He had not enjoyed good relationships with Lauda or Andretti in his time at Ferrari and Lotus, although he did form a strong bond with Gilles Villeneuve when the Canadian replaced Lauda in 1978. The relationship between Jones and Reutemann had been difficult, the no-nonsense Aussie, who shot from the hip and told things as they were, and the Argentinian, more reserved, more artistic and more cerebral. In 1980, the conditions of their employment were clear. Jones was to win the World Championship. Reutemann was the wingman, there to provide cover. The partnership worked well in 1980, but in 1981, Reutemann felt that he had done his number 2 duty and was now free to take his shot at the title. A sense of Reutemann's frame of mind can be taken from his conversation with Gilles Villeneuve before the 1979 title-deciding Italian Grand Prix. He advised Villeneuve to go out and win the race, not to sit behind Scheckter because team orders said that he should do so. In a prophetic statement, he told Villeneuve, "You may never get another chance to be world champion." So to Brazil, where Reutemann had qualified second and Jones third, almost a full second slower than his teammate. Neither could get anywhere near Nelson Piquet's Brabham. But on race day, heavy rain fell, and Piquet and Brabham team manager Alistair Caldwell made a joint decision to start the race on slicks, expecting the rain to stop, something which never looked likely. From the start, Reutemann took the lead, with Beatrice briefly sneaking ahead of Jones for second place, before the Williams reclaimed it on lap 2. It soon became very clear that the Williams cars were going to be unchallenged, with Beatrice comfortable in third place, but posing no threat to the leaders. Just after half distance, Frank Williams had his team signal the drivers to change positions, but Reutemann continued to lead. When the checkered flag was shown early on lap 62, because the rain-slowed race had reached the 2-hour limit, the two Williams finished in reverse order. Jones was furious and didn't attend the podium ceremony, although later he was outwardly philosophical about the result, telling members of the press that he now knew he had to race his teammate the same way he raced other drivers. But inwardly he was still seething, and whatever working relationship the two drivers had built up was destroyed. As Jones put it, if he didn't like his contract, he shouldn't have signed it. For Reutemann's part, he claimed that he had been intending to let Jones pass before the last corner of the last lap, but because that lap never happened, he had been wrong-footed. However, privately he admitted that his reasons were different. At 39 years old, he felt 1981 was his last chance at becoming world champion. He had also been massively faster than Jones all weekend, and felt it unfair that he give up a well-earned victory. Ultimately, the Argentinian had decided that his relationship with Jones was not worth more to him than the World Championship, and as a result, he had chosen to win the race. The open animosity between the two drivers affected team morale and results over the rest of the season. Once it became clear that Reutemann was the team's only shot at the title, there was a strong feeling that many in the team didn't actually care whether the title was won or lost. For Jones' part, he would not take another win till the end of the season, for one reason or another. In Belgium, he crashed whilst leading. In Monaco, he lost victory because of fuel pickup problems. And in Spain, he made a mistake and crashed again whilst leading. In the 8 races between Brazil and Austria, Jones scored just 10 points, whilst Piquet and Reutemann collected 30 and 27 respectively. His title defence was all but over. A suggestion that Jones support Reutemann's championship battle was firmly rebuffed, and when the Argentinian asked that they bury the hatchet, Jones promised to bury it in his back. By Austria, Jones had made the decision to retire from Formula One. He was homesick and missed his family. The politics of Formula One, both inside and outside the team, were making the sport less appealing to him, and Jones was never a political animal. He informed the team of his decision in September, late enough to cause them problems replacing him, albeit that was unlikely to have been his intention. From Austria on, his performance and results improved, no doubt aided by the removal of the burden of his decision. In the last 5 races, he would outscore both Piquet and Reutemann, and finish the championship just 4 points behind winner Piquet. His win in the last race at Las Vegas was legendary. This was the first race in the car park of the Caesars Palace Hotel, and there was a 3-way battle for the title. Reutemann led with a 1-point advantage over Piquet, with Jacques Lafitte a further 5 points back. Lafitte's only hope was to win the race, but having qualified 12th, he was unlikely to figure, leaving Reutemann and Piquet in a head-to-head battle. Reutemann qualified on pole. Piquet was 4th. Whoever finished ahead would take the title, or if neither finished, it would be Reutemann. Jones, in 2nd place, once more reiterated that he had no intention of helping Reutemann's challenge. From the start, Jones leapt into the lead, with Villeneuve climbing to 2nd. Although he was immediately disqualified for starting outside of his grid slot, Jones flew off into the distance, whilst all those who might have challenged him were bottled up behind Villeneuve's unruly Ferrari. By the time Villeneuve crashed out on lap 21, Jones was gone for the afternoon. He stretched his lead out to 20 seconds by the checkered flag, driving as well as he had ever done. It was a stunning victory, the taste of which was sweetened further when Reutemann, suffering from tyre problems and having lost 4th gear, was unable to see off Piquet and lost out on the title to the Brazilian, who came home 5th. Jones walked away from the sport at the top of the game, viewed by many commentators as the most complete race driver of the period. A 2nd World Championship had been lost in the run between Belgium and Spain, when he had given up 21 points, enough to easily take the title. Many felt that he was retiring too early, but if he was going to retire, then that Caesars Palace victory would stand out as the most dominant way to end a Formula One career. Of course, this was to be the era of champions returning to the sport. In 1982, Niki Lauda signed to drive for McLaren, and then, when Carlos Reutemann announced his sudden retirement 2 races into the new season, Mario Andretti returned to fill his spot at Long Beach. Andretti would drive again at the end of the season for Ferrari, replacing the injured Didier Pironi. Jones had actually been Ferrari's first choice to replace Pironi, but mindful of the way the team had snubbed him earlier in his career, he led them on and messed them around sufficiently that Andretti was offered the drive instead. Given that the car was the best in the field, Jones had passed up a golden opportunity. More so, because if he had delivered results in the final 2 races of the season, it's likely that Ferrari would have given him a race seat for 1983 ahead of Patrick Tambay. Andretti would score a remarkable pole position on his first drive for the team, before racing to a podium finish, and this perhaps did much to persuade Jones to agree a somewhat brief return with Arrows at the start of 1983. At Long Beach, Jones replaced Chico Serra, despite having only recently broken a hip in a fall from a horse. This didn't appear to have much of an impact on his performance though. He qualified the Arrows 12th on the grid, ahead of regular driver Mark Sura. During the race, Jones ran inside the top 10, but eventually had to retire the car, exhausted after his efforts in the heat. A lack of racing during his absence, added to the recuperation from his injury, hadn't helped his fitness. Nevertheless, it was a strong showing after his time away. Jones then had a second outing for Arrows in the Brands Hatch Race of Champions, the last non-championship Formula One race to date. The field wasn't the strongest, with only 13 cars attending, and of those, only half being driven by their regular drivers. Nevertheless, Jones qualified the Arrows 3rd, ahead of John Watson's McLaren and Nigel Mansell's Lotus, and raced to a 3rd place finish behind Keke Rosberg and Danny Sullivan. Despite promising results, sponsorship to keep Jones in the car wasn't forthcoming, and the Arrows team were forced to revert to Chico Serra, who had funds to complete the season. Jones returned to retirement, but the racing bug still itched, and he competed in several Group C sports car races in the remainder of 1983 and through 1984. His second retirement was to be only marginally longer than his first. At the end of 1984, Jones was approached with the offer of a drive for a completely new team, in an intriguing operation which promised much. The team was to be operated by successful IndyCar operator Carl Haas, and would receive financial backing for its operations on both sides of the Atlantic from Beatrice Foods. Who, you might ask? As many people in the UK and Europe did in 1984. Beatrice Foods was an American conglomerate which owned food brands like Tropicana and Danone, consumer brands such as Max Factor Cosmetics and Samsonite Luggage, and also owned Avis Car Rental, one of the biggest in the world. Why it chose to feature the one name almost nobody was familiar with in their sponsorship deal is intriguing, but they had deep pockets, so it wasn't really important. The car would be built by Force and be called a Lola, whilst the engine would be a brand new V6 turbo engine from Ford, which would be exclusive to the new team. Jones was quick to sign, and things looked promising until they didn't. The Ford engine was late. Very late. Very, very late. As a result, the team needed to re-engineer their car to take the 4-cylinder Hart turbo engine instead. That took so long that they only made their debut at the tail end of the season, at Monza for the 1985 Italian Grand Prix. The car's performance in this cobbled-together version was poor, with Jones qualifying on the back row of the grid almost 10 seconds off the pace of pole-sitter Ayrton Senna's Lotus Renault. The car lasted a bare 6 laps before retiring with engine failure. Of the 4 races the car entered in what was left of the season, Jones scored a best qualifying position of 18th in the boycott-affected South African Grand Prix, but didn't actually start the race. He did, however, get to start the first ever World Championship Australian Grand Prix in Adelaide, although the car once more failed after just 20 laps. The Beatrice Haas Lola Hart didn't score a single finish, but at least the new Ford engine would be ready for 1986, and that would be a more competitive proposition. For the new season, Haas expanded his team to a second car, with former Ferrari and Renault driver Patrick Tambay becoming Jones's teammate. Inevitably, when the season started, the new Ford engine was still not ready, so both drivers opened the year with the Hart-powered car. When the new car, complete with Ford engine, was ready, it was given to Jones, and its performance was hugely underwhelming. Jones struggled to 21st place on the grid, whilst Tambay took the old car to 11th place. the best it had ever achieved. At Monaco, both drivers had the new car, and whilst Tournbay took an excellent 8th place on the grid, Jones struggled to make the field, ending up in 18th, and then crashed out on the second lap of the race. The pattern continued in the following races, with Jones qualifying in the midfield and Tournbay in the top 10. And worse was to come for Jones. When Tournbay was injured in Canada, Haas deputised Eddie Cheever for the Detroit race. The American qualified in 10th place in his first outing in the car, whilst Jones struggled to 21st, and both cars retired with steering issues. It was only when the team got to Hungary when Jones started to show some progress, qualifying 10th, albeit behind a returning Tournbay in 6th place. Then, in the next race in Austria, Jones converted a poor qualifying position to a 4th place finish, ahead of Tournbay in 5th. Beatrice Haas scored its first points in Formula 1. And at the next race in Italy, he was able to claim 6th place and more points for the team. By now, Jones had begun to think about retirement once more. The 1986 season had seen him comprehensively outqualified by his teammate, and the car's poor reliability in the race, added to a power deficit from the Ford engine, had made it an all-round difficult season. Trekking around the world to be an also-ran didn't appeal to a former world champion, and after the final race in Australia, he quit Formula 1 for good. Tournbay did likewise, and Beatrice pulled the rug from under the Haas operation, which also folded. The Ford engine would be given to Benetton for 1987, where Teo Fabi would claim 3rd place in Austria, marking the only time it would power a driver to the podium in its short life. Jones went home to Australia, where he reverted to racing saloon cars, taking several wins in the Australian Touring Car Championship and claiming the Australian GT Championship. Jones's talent is definitely underestimated when compared to his peers. In truth, he had just 3 seasons in competitive cars, from 1979 to 1981. He can justifiably claim to have been the best racer in each of those seasons, and lost 2 world championships through no fault of his own. His decision to retire, the first time, was perhaps made in haste, and I feel was a knee-jerk response to the politics dominating Formula 1 at the time. Had he stayed in 1982, who knows what would have happened in that crazy season. If he hadn't messed Ferrari around in the autumn of that year, he could have returned with a top team and the best car, certainly making him a competitor for the 1983 title. Ultimately, though, there's a part of me that's sad that when Jones made his decision to retire at the end of 1981, he didn't stick to it. What happened in 1983, 1985 and 1986 somewhat tarnished his legacy, and the idea that he could have gone out at the top of the sport, having just trounced the field and being widely recognised as the best in the field, flicking 2 fingers up on his way out of the door, just feels like the most Australian way to have done it.